raise some
Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.
Welcome to the Raising Cain show, where we dive into the stories shaping our republic and the people fighting for our freedoms. I'm your host, Nate Cain, and today we have an incredible guest with us, Jason Fick. Jason is a social media entrepreneur, author, and fierce advocate for free speech. His journey from an early career selling Jeep parts on eBay to founding WTF magazine and building a massive social media empire is nothing short of remarkable. But his story doesn't stop there. Jason faced unjust legal battles, wrongful imprisonment, and the devastating loss of his thriving business when Facebook unpublished his pages. Now he's on the front lines of the battle against big tech censorship, taking on Section 230 and fighting to protect the free speech rights of all Americans. He founded the Social Media Freedom Foundation, and after years of litigation, he has oral arguments scheduled for November 20th, 2024. This is a conversation that you don't want to miss. Now let's welcome Jason Fick to the show. Jason, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Nate.
So, Jason, I guess a good starting point is your journey to becoming a leading advocate for free speech started after a pretty intense personal experience. Can you share more about your wrongful arrest in 2011 and how that moment shaped your views on government overreach and the First Amendment?
Yeah, so like you said, it was 2011. I had just started up a magazine. I had to reinvent myself after the real estate collapse, and that sort of took me out. So I was sort of trying a whole new industry. My first interview ever was with a bunch of motorcycle stunt guys, right? They were doing stuff on YouTube, and I thought, okay, I'll go down and like any business, you fake it till you make it. So I was going down there to figure out how to get some kind of magazine together and have some interesting stuff. Well, lo and behold, this night progresses. Everybody's having fun at this bar, and I'm taking pictures with these semi-celebrities back in the day. And at the end of the night, we were packing up, and they said, do you want to just crash at our place, and can we grab a ride home? Well, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't want to drive 2 hours home, and I'm thinking I can avoid a hotel, and I don't have to drive all the way home. So it was like, sure, no problem. Well, I thought it was going to be one guy in the car. Well, it turned out it was a whole 3 or 4 or 5 people. And we head to the parking garage, and you know how it goes. You've been drinking in a bar. I was dead sober. Like, that's why I was driving. But between them and another group that walked out, from a stairwell, just as we're getting to the car, an argument ensued, and some fists were thrown, and some, it was a dumb little scuffle is really what it was. Nobody was seriously hurt. The only weapon, so to speak, was the other girl had it pulled out for high heel and was swinging it around. That was the worst of it. The police report and the hospital report said a possible broken nose. And what did I do? I took my cell phone out and recorded it. And I think pretty much, now remember, this is 2011, so this is over a decade ago, right? Mm-hmm. Nowadays, people understand that's First Amendment protected. I'm in a public parking garage taking a video 30 feet away from a small scuffle that nobody was seriously hurt. Both sides went their own ways. And reality is that I said, you know what, I don't even want to be a part of this. So I dropped them off and I went home. That was my total involvement. Didn't get involved in the fight. Nobody seriously hurt. I put the video up the next day. Of course, it went viral. And next thing I know, I have the family of those people threatening me, saying that I'm from your government. I'm here to F you up. Full-blown threat. Said they're from my government. And I, okay, great, tough guy, that kind of thing. Well, not quite the same thing. In fact, they were actually connected to law enforcement. The family of one of the girls there they were all Baltimore cops. So even though she was really the one who instigated the fight, she turned into the victim. They turned into the assailants, and I was the kingpin. That's how it shook out. And the craziest part about it is, now, again, nobody seriously hurt, no weapons, everybody went home. They didn't go to the hospital until the next day when they thought they wanted to build a case up against us. I was arrested. You know what I was arrested for? Conspiracy to commit first-degree attempted murder.
Wow.
A cell phone video.
Wow.
It was a complete violation of my rights. It was malicious prosecution because the cops were involved with the people, the plaintiffs, essentially. Mm-hmm. And I got railroaded. I mean, this was full. And not only that, but I got denied bail. And the judge said, "Oh, I remember this case." Before, in a bail hearing, she remembers this case. How is that? So I knew I was getting railroaded by a system. And I mean, you have to understand, they're trying to take my life away from me.
Yep.
The odd thing is that here I am in Baltimore, the entire bail hearing, everyone was black but me. I was the only white guy there out of maybe 30, 35 people. I was listening to some of the most just horrible charges. And I stand up, she says she remembers this, and I get denied a bail having surrendered myself because I came from a different state, drove down and surrendered myself. I was a threat to society. Thriving business, family, no record of my entire life, privately school educated. And I'm going, and then the next guy behind me, he gets a bail, and it was his 8th felony assault. He hit a guy in the head with a baseball bat. He got a bail. I knew the system was broken, like really broken.
Yep.
And at that point, I realized enough is enough with this corruption thing. We need to go after it. That's how this started.
So I imagine probably, we were talking before the show, and I was sharing a little bit about my background and what the misfortune that I had with the justice system as a protected whistleblower. I had 16 agents raid my home. They outed me to the public. I had, like I said, multiple death threats. I got poisoned twice, had my lug nuts loosened on my vehicle. I had surveillance illegally done on me for over 2 years. And, at the end of the day, I ended up having to move and completely take my family out of Maryland. And we moved to West Virginia, and it was just insane what I had to go through. But I imagine after seeing, after 2020, in 2021, after January 16, just how the Justice Department came down on essentially what amounted to a few rioters and a whole hell of a lot of people that were exercising their First Amendment right to assemble peaceably and make their grievances known to their government. All of these people having their whole lives destroyed, being thrown in jail, being denied bail, being denied counsel. You must have been reliving a lot of your own experience, seeing all of that stuff going on.
It's funny because there are some very big parallels there. It was free expression. You can't, nobody can reasonably condone all of it. Some of the things that were done were wrong.
Sure.
And rightfully, there should have been some charges here and there. But the charges were just like my case, ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely ridiculous. And the reason that occurred, and it's a great segue into sort of what I'm working on at the moment, is it was a law, 1512C2, that was being misinterpreted by the courts in order to amplify the charges. So what should have been criminal trespassing, maybe, turned into 20-year sentences.
Right.
It
Over
was
prosecution.
Right, and it's malicious prosecution, and we all know it. We all can see it, and the reality is, and then of course they go, oh, it was the worse than 9/11, which is, I mean, that doesn't do 9/11 any dignity. I mean, that's really an egregious thing to say. But see, that is kind of what I'm dealing with right now. It's misapplication of law, and they've weaponized the law against the citizens. And when I said they, I mean the government. The government has gone full off the rails, weaponizing against the people. And we'll get a little bit deeper into who they are, so to speak.
Sure.
But so from that whole scenario that happened down in Baltimore, I decided, I needed to tell my story. And to do that, you need an audience. Obviously, you do the same thing, right? It's about building an audience, and that's how you get the message out. So I started building in Facebook before anybody realized the power and value of it. This was 2011. By 2012, I believe by the end of the year, I think at one point I counted 16.8 million fans in 2012. Wow. BuzzFeed had 9.7. Does that put it in context? I was huge, right?
Yeah. Well, WTF magazine became incredibly popular, and in 2013, you had a massive social media following. How did you grow your business on platforms like Facebook, and what was the turning point when things started to unravel?
It's real simple. They didn't restrict us back then. They actually tried to to get you to their whole offer to everybody think about this. Build your business on social media. You'll be able to reach your audience and distribute your products or words or speech or whatever. That's how they enticed us to that. That was the promise. All we had to do was come use their services, right? And of course, they got our data and so forth. But things changed, and it changed right under everybody's nose, and nobody realized it. So I'm going to ask you just a couple simple questions here. If you post something on Facebook, your audience, where are they going to see it? Where would they receive it?
Well, they'd have to go to my page to see it, unless
they would have to actively go there, or
boost the post or something like that. And
yeah,
I'm not
where would
even
they
sure
typically
that
see it?
any good, anyways.
Well, that's true too. But no, let's get simpler than that. Realistically, who's going to go to your page? Who's going to go to your page? They're not going to actively do it, are they?
No.
So where are they going to see it?
Well, that's what I want to share with you something too, because I'll give you a perfect example. So our show tonight is live right now. I've got on Twitter, we have 498 people and 500 now that are live watching the show.
Okay.
On Facebook, I've got 2.
Okay. But let me ask you this. Where are they looking at it? This is a real simple question. Did they come to your page, or was it shown to them?
Well, for me, they would have to come to my page because they're blocking all of my content.
Okay.
Going out to anybody. And we found this out actually recently when my assistant basically went on there to post something, for one of the shows that we were doing. And on Facebook, she put my name, with a hashtag, and she put my handle, Nate Cain for WV, as a hashtag, because that way when people search, they can find my stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, she went out, and then she needed to go in there and make a change to the wording or something. And when she went back in, those 2 hashtags were gone. All the other ones were still there. All the other keywords were still there, but Nate Cain and Nate Cain for WV were gone. So they're actively suppressing, anything that is being posted if you're on whatever naughty list that, they see you on. And I'm assuming because I'm a conservative and I speak out against, all the things that go against their agenda, and I speak out against them too. So the only reason I'm on Facebook is because most of the people in West Virginia, who, you know, is a lot of my reach. Unfortunately, Facebook is the largest social media platform used in West Virginia.
Well, I'm trying to get to the root of something, and
Sure.
it's a very simple path. If you share something, somebody is going to see it in their news feed. Am I correct?
Yes.
Twitter, Facebook, search results for Google, they're going to be given that information by one of the social media companies, right?
That's right.
Sure, right. So a normal distributor who is just a neutral party, if they ask for Nate Cain, they should give you Nate Cain, right?
That's right. Yep.
Okay. I'm going to explain how everything changed. Back in the day, if everybody, it was a fair playing field. If you had a bigger audience, more people saw it because more content made it into the feed. If you were something people liked, it would go viral, right? But you would always be given it in your newsfeed. There's a reason for that. We're lazy. Everybody's lazy. So unless they're targeted to come get your show from your site or your information, know when it's on, they're not going to get it, right? It's aggregation of content. So
that's right.
Think about this for a moment, right? I'm going to give you the whole structure of this and you'll understand. So in that circumstance, the platforms are a dominant party, aren't they? They get to decide everything, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Now, if my content was traditionally in the news feed, but the problem is that people only spend a specific amount of time on newsfeed, right? There's only so much time you spend on social media. So it's not infinite because it's the amount of time people actually spend is a finite number, right? We don't know exactly what it is, but if they're going to come on, the more important stuff at the top is going to get more views, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if the dominant party, social media, can then control what's at the top, right?
Yep.
They then control the strings of every business. Now they invited us on, said, hey, look, reach and distribution, except for the fact that they'll leverage that reach and distribution to then, now let me ask you something. If you, not your circumstance specifically, but if you boost or sponsor an advertisement, what happens? Moves up the feed, doesn't it?
That's right.
Second, third, if a Google business, pays Google, you're going to find in the first search page, right? Okay.
Yes.
Now, if I was if I was in the original newsfeed as number one, and then Facebook takes money from somebody just like me, let's just say it's you, right? The Nate Cain show. What about the Jason Fick show? Now, I was doing it organically. I wasn't paying them, but that's what they offered us. They said, come do it for free. And I built my audience. I based it on their representations. I built my business, and I built a massive business. Huge. That's called a perspective economic advantage. I was ahead of everybody, right? But then if you come in and you pay Facebook to displace me, you're my straight line competitor in a partnership with a dominant party. You know what they call that? Unfair competition. I can't compete fairly anymore because you are paying them to get rid of me.
Well,
so their entire business, let me finish this real quick. Their entire business model shifted from data aggregation to, paid extortion. If you don't pay us, we're going to force your business out.
Right.
Ta-da! The whole business model is an unfair competition antitrust. And guess what? Mark Zuckerberg has even recently admitted that antitrust is an existential threat, big tech. Guess why? Because their entire business model is based on it. You get why it now is like incredibly dangerous to them, what we're doing. We know how to get them.
It's interesting what you just brought up something that I had just spent some time talking about with Dr. Epstein because we were talking about media manipulation, and there was an article in Axios just this week about what you just mentioned being done on Google, except in that case, they were, they're basically boosting. They were allowing Kamala Harris essentially to go in there and manipulate headlines, and create these fake, sponsored headlines, but make it look like they were legitimately, being put out there by, by
Nike or ABC or it was something. I remember that.
Yeah, and it creates an unfair advantage. But he was talking about how it affects everything from our elections, because they're manipulating people, and then in that case they're doing it on all kinds of stuff, to where they're pushing like suggested, hey, you should look at this, or hey, you should click on this, and they're doing it where they're not charging, they're not charging, say, the Democrats or whatever to push that. Like, they're sending out notices to just Democrats to say, hey, make sure you go out and vote, but they're not doing that to people who are Republican. And so they brought a lawsuit to say, hey, this isn't right. This is a corrupt, unfair, advantage. But unfortunately, the Google, of course, they said, well, it doesn't cost us anything. So it's not we're not giving what do they call that? We're basically not, it's not a campaign finance violation, because it doesn't cost us anything to do that. But the problem is if a Republican wanted to have that same thing, the amount of money it would cost them to do that, it would be extremely expensive. And so, in the same way, like with you, with your show, if they put somebody ahead of you who's paying, and then they tell you, who built your business organically, hey, you now need to, pay up, or we're going to essentially, put you in the back of the, we'll put you at the back of the bus unless you're going to pay up. It reminds me of the mafia extortion, where they would go into a town and go onto a street and say, hey, you got to pay us, protection money.
Racketeering scheme.
When we're the ones who are actually going to steal from you and shut down your store. So the protection
that literally echoes exactly what some of our case complaints have. It is a racketeering scheme, and in fact, this is why we're fighting tooth and nail. Here's the thing: law matters, right? We just talked about 1512C2 being misused. So Section 230, this brings us right into it, right? Yeah. And I'm going to explain how they're in deep trouble. It's coming. Their end of days is actually coming, and we know how and why. So let me explain this. Matter of fact, you have a computer in front of you. Can you pull up a law by any chance? Can you Google something? This will be good for the audience because you can see it. Look up Cornell Section 230. It'll bring you to the CDA Section 230.
All right.
I know it verbatim, but it's easier if you actually see it. But I want to walk you through the law and how they messed it up, essentially did what they did with 1512, and they've abused it, and they continue to abuse it because, for whatever reason, hint, the California courts just won't get it right. Now, the Third Circuit and Fourth Circuit have already gotten it right. There we go. Can you scroll down to 230C1, which would be C1?
Protection for good Samaritan, blocking and screening of offensive material.
Yep. Now, that's C is what's called, it's considered a long title, right? You notice that Good Samaritan is in quotes?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to show you something about this law that nobody can do, that nobody even knows about predominantly, but this is what we figured out. So Good Samaritan is in quotes. When you quote something, what does that mean? Somebody else said it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if somebody else said it, now let me ask you something. Do you know what an affirmative defense is?
No.
An affirmative defense, I'll give you a good example. Self-defense.
Okay.
Right? That's an affirmative defense. In an affirmative defense, you commit an otherwise unlawful act. However, there's a law in the books that says if they act within the structure of what Congress intended, which was in the defense of self or the defense of others, right? That's the basic premise, right? The basic intent. Then you can, the burden of proof shifts to the defendant, right? You shoot somebody, you don't just get away with it. You go to court, and then you have to prove that you acted in self-defense, correct?
Yep.
That's how an affirmative defense works. Well, guess what? Section 230 is an affirmative defense. And guess what Good Samaritan is? That's self-defense right there.
Right. They're saying
that is the basic principle of what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be Good Samaritans, meaning they're not supposed to be acting for their own good. They're supposed to be acting for the good of others. And who said that, Good Samaritan, is Congress. It's called a congressional intelligible principle. That's its formal name. Okay. That right there should be your basic question coming in the door at any court case. Were they acting as a Good Samaritan? If not, we're done. But no, what's happened is, and I'm going to show you where the mistake is, right? This is the holy grail. This unlocks everything in like the Rosetta Stone. In 230C1, treatment of publisher or speaker, it says no provider, user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. The courts have said over the past 2.5 decades that you can't treat them as a publisher.
That's right.
Because the content came from somebody else, right?
That's right.
Now, look at it carefully. Does it say that they cannot be treated as a publisher or speaker? Or does it say the publisher or speaker?
That's the publisher or speaker.
Every word of the law is very important, because if you change a word, you change the meaning of the sentence. That is a definite article, right? The publisher or speaker, it's just like a White House or the White House, right? You don't even need that whole sentence. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yep.
The one in Washington, right? Because we already know who or what it is. The publisher or speaker is another information content provider, meaning the publisher or speaker is anybody else other than the provider or user. So that sentence, boiled down, says you can't be treated as someone else for what somebody else did. Now, normal people read that, right? That is not what the courts have done. They have read it consistently as a publisher or speaker, meaning if the content started with somebody else and they act upon it as a publisher, they cannot be held accountable as a publisher at all. That's unlimited immunity. That one part right there. Now, the funny part is, not so funny, if you can't be treated as a publisher, look at C2A. Any action voluntarily taken in good. Now, everybody thinks this is the problem. It's not. Any action voluntarily taken in good faith to restrict access to or availability of material that the provider or user considers to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable, whether or not such material is constitutionally protected. And they go, oh, it's unconstitutional. Believe it or not, it's not. Let me explain the problem. If you're taking any action to restrict access to or availability of materials, is that not publishing? Isn't that what an editor does?
Yeah.
So if you can't be treated as a publisher but act as a publisher under C1, what purpose does that have? Nothing.
That's right.
It's duplicative. Laws aren't supposed to be duplicative. However, if it's read correctly, as it's actually written, that says they can't be treated as somebody else for what somebody else did. And this gives them a limited window to restrict materials in good faith. And guess what's even better than that? Do you know who decides what's good faith? Not big tech, not the courts, a jury of your peers.
That makes
and that
sense.
is why it is not unconstitutional, because it would be private citizens deciding what is good faith in the interest of the public.
That
it
makes
changes
sense,
everything.
because I've analyzed this from this perspective of obscene material. One of the big issues.
You're actually looking at the red herring.
Well, yeah, and so one of the things that's been a big issue, right, has been sexually explicit material in public libraries at like elementary schools for kids.
Right.
And so there's been a lot of talk about, well, look, federal law makes it clear that you can't show obscene material.
You can't knowingly provide sexually explicit content of children. Let me take it one step further. This is going to really blow your mind. Ready for this one? Yep. Go down to E3.
Okay, state law.
Okay, actually 230. Oh, you know what? It's E. Where's the definition section? Sorry.
Definitions is
There it is. F3. Sorry, my apologies.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Now, an information content provider is liable for what they do. An interactive computer service, you see 2? It says interactive computer service. That is not liable because they can't be treated as somebody else. They didn't do anything. They're just distributors, right? That's the basic way to understand it. C3 explains the party that would be liable for what is said, right? Okay. Now let's read this carefully. An information content provider, this is what everybody's calling publisher. No, this is the actual language. This is what it is. The term information content provider means any person or entity, so there's your Facebook, your Google, your Twitter, that is responsible for, in whole or in part. Let's dissect that. That means entirely or even just slightly, right? Just a little bit. They put it right in the law. It says for the creation or development, and or. So creation and development are different, right? Of information provided through the internet and any other interactive computer service. Now, I am going to explain how this thing unlocks automatically. Every single court in the past has thought everything has to be creation. There has to be some material change brought into existence, alterations, etc., for them to become a content provider, but it's not.
Yeah, it says or development of information. Right?
If you knowingly take information that is harmful and you provide it to somebody else on purpose, you have developed that information, correct?
Yes.
You didn't have to change anything other than making it more available to somebody else, meaning the division, which has never been defined. The Supreme Court wrestled over this in Gonzalez versus Google, but it becomes very, very, very hard line as soon as you understand that Section 230C1 gets corrected. As soon as they affirmatively act upon content, as soon as they consider it, they have now become partially responsible for it. Now, you may be thinking,
now at that point, they are developing information.
They're a knowing participant in content provision. They're developing the information, meaning exactly what you just said would in fact be liable. If they are allowing content, that is very different than failing to remove bad content, correct?
Right.
If they fail to remove it, they're not providers. They didn't do anything. They can't be treated as the one who did it. C1 applies. If they knowingly allow, they're developing it, meaning if they're recommending, advancing, anything, all of these things that they were doing for Kamala, there's content development. They are in fact liable for it. And let me just end with this. Now, this is where it kind of gets a little, it's kind of crazy, but now you're looking at it from the perspective of, let's look at it this way. This isn't even my just crazy rantings, right? No, the Third Circuit Court is now in alignment with us. My case with Facebook has gone to the Supreme Court twice. I have asked the same question twice. We are going to have to ask it a third time. Does 230C1 protect any of the provider or user's own content or conduct? It doesn't. They're not supposed to be doing anything. The line gets drawn real hard the moment that they get involved at all. That would solve the whole understanding of this law. The duplicity of it stops. But here's the crazy part. The Third Circuit you saw the Anderson versus TikTok case, right?
Yes.
They lost that dismissal proceeding. And you know why? Because, and let me put it in the framework of the new understanding of this. Now they keep calling it a narrowing of Section 230 as opposed to, it's not a narrowing, just doing what it says is all we're asking to do. The law says it. We're not asking for anything radical. Do what it says. Well, here's the thing. They knew that there was, the blackout challenge. Remember that?
Yes.
And you can put that away now because those are the three sections that are kind of vital to the argument. But they knew about the blackout challenge and they didn't take them down. In fact, they recommended them to other children and kids died because of it. Now, here's the thing. If I was a plaintiff in that circumstance, my child had died, am I trying to treat them as the person who created the content? Or am I trying to hold them accountable for their negligent conduct in knowingly developing that content by recommending it to others? Their knowledge And in-part development makes them responsible. And guess what? They succeeded. It's moving forward. There's a case, Henderson versus Public Data. Similar situation where other courts outside of California are getting it right, but California is still struggling on that one. But here's the good news.
Yeah.
Good news. Ready for this?
Yep.
After 6 years, every time we have gone, so before a case, you go into oral arguments, right? To argue about whether the law applies or anything else like that on a dismissal stage. Every single time I have gone through the California courts, my oral arguments have been set. They say, hey, this week you're going to go, and then they vacate it, which means that they just cancel it. I have never once been in a court in 6 years of litigation. We were so far ahead of our times, we had to wait for the entire legal system to catch up to what we have had in briefs since 2018. We knew how to solve this. And everybody else has been reading our stuff and, of course, utilizing that, which changed the whole system to catch up to us. Now, here's the cool part. So our case, my case, was Northern District of California. I have no faith in California anymore. No faith in that court. And that's San Francisco.
Yeah.
Our judge, after 5 years, when we hit them with something they weren't expecting, which was what's called a procedural rule 5.1 constitutional challenge, meaning when they denied me of all legal remedy for a legal right, which is to hold Facebook accountable for denying me of my individual civil liberties, the United States concretely and particularly denied me of due process, meaning they violated my rights. Not Facebook, the government. Yeah. Now I can challenge the law itself, and I am. And the crazy part is that the one judge, he said, nope, I'm out. He recused himself.
Does that fall under deprivation of rights under color of law?
Not necessarily under color of law, because they are an authority.
Sure.
But no judge has, rights are the supreme law of the land.
Right.
The reality is that even the law, even if if they're even correct that it denies, if they can restrain my civil liberties, Facebook, Google, Twitter, whatever, and the government is insulating them fully with no legal remedy at all, that's an unconstitutional law on its face. We're not saying that. We're saying it as applied, because there is a correct constitutional version of this, which is the way we said it works. It's the only way it works, because the other way is unfettered immunity. Because they take out the Good Samaritan, they take out the good faith, well, then Congress's intent's not even there. You can't do that. That's like sitting there saying you can shoot somebody secondarily on a property because you can't be treated as a shooter and you don't have to act in self-defense. That's absurd, right?
Yeah.
Well, here's the craziest part. The Northern District of California, the judge recuses himself voluntarily. Turns out he has millions in tech stock. Another Obama appointed judge comes in.
Oh my gosh.
And this is a whopper. He just decides, forget all of the case law that is militating in our direction. Forget justice. Forget right. The constitutional challenge has a whole paragraph. Non-forfeiture. You know what that means, Nate, right? You can't forfeit it. Yeah. Because it's a right. No court can do that. You know what he did? Terminated it. Without even nothing. Just terminated it. Said it was freestanding. It wasn't freestanding. We identified where they actually violated my rights, but he decided nope. And the crazy part is we are now back in the ninth going, you got a problem. You've got all sorts of problems going on here that are way outside the realm of normal law. You've got other circuits that conflict with you. We even have another case that came along in the Northern District of California. There's a great judge out there, Judge Alsa. An identical case to mine. Fact pattern is identical. You just could have swapped around defendants and plaintiffs, right? Actually, the defendant is the same. It's still meta. The judge recognized what was going on as C1 being essentially a workaround for C2, right? And he said, and I quote, let me see if I get this right. He said, to approve Meta's 230C1 defense would make 230C1 a backdoor to CDA immunity, contrary to the purpose and history of the law. In other words, C1 would work around C2, and there's no There's no good faith. You just can't be a publisher. And that's ridiculous. But get this. So they set oral argument, said, yep. And we're like, oh, okay, here we go. They're probably going to vacate it again. Ooh. Nope. Then we get a notice. It's been moved to San Jose. Then 10 minutes later, it got moved to Pasadena. So I believe that's the Southern District of California. So we've now moved twice. Now, it might make sense if...
Did they move it out of San Jose because that's where, basically Silicon Valley is, or?
Well, see, this is a strange thing. Sometimes they move cases because it's just easier on a judge's schedule, but I don't think there's any judges that are in in San Francisco, San Jose, and Pasadena. Yeah. That's rare for three courts. Yeah. So I got moved to Pasadena, and then it was changed the date to the week of the 4th through 8th. So we now just still have a window, right? Nope, we got a notice the other day, like last week. It is now November 20th at 9:30 in the morning in courtroom 1. Tell me why they would move the case twice, change its dates, set it for a time, and set it for a courtroom unless that we're actually getting in the door. If we get in the door, we can fix everything, the entire internet, because that changes this law. It makes it constitutional. Good faith kicks back in again. Cases will actually have to go to trial. The public will decide what is done in good faith and whether they were a good Samaritan. And guess what? The government loses its antitrust leverage over big tech, meaning they can't go, oh, we might scrutinize the law a little bit more and hold you accountable for antitrust, or we might just keep ignoring it. See the leverage? There's your pivot point.
Yeah.
And that's what they really had over big tech, which I don't know, maybe big tech would prefer that, but the reality is they still are facing the fact that their entire business models are illegal.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, I've got to cut to a commercial break to give a word to our sponsor, but we're going to get into some more of this. And I really want to hear what you think is going to be, in the end, what's going to be the recourse for all of this, because there's, millions of users that have essentially been defrauded by these companies. I think about YouTube, all the contracts that people didn't get paid on when they were, had their accounts, basically, cut off.
Yeah.
And they were basically shutting down, they were censoring their videos, and they were making, those videos they make money off of. I see a huge, I think if your case is one, this is going to blow things open for a lot of things. And I think there could be major recourse on all of these companies. So folks, we're going to be right back. Stick with us. We're going to get into some more of this stuff, and it's going to be pretty fascinating.
Born in the coastal plains of South Texas, Smoking Gun Coffee is founded by combat veterans that know exactly what a cup of coffee needs to taste like. Run by father and son, each coffee bean is perfected, roasted at 500 degrees, and cooled with a Gulf Coast breeze. Smoking Gun Coffee hand makes and bags each ounce of coffee for maximum customer satisfaction. With every purchase, 10% goes back to organizations that help veterans and local communities. That's Texas made, one bag at a time. To find out more, go to www.smokingguncoffee.com.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Raising Cain Show. Remember, when you go to Smoking Gun, you're not only helping the show, but you're also helping veterans. And remember, if you go and you buy coffee there, make sure they use the code CAIN. That way we get credit for the purchase. We've been talking here with my guest Jason Fick, and we've been talking about his case against Facebook or Meta, I should say. You have oral arguments scheduled for November after 6 years of litigation. What do you hope? What would be the best case scenario in terms of the outcome of this case, and what impact do you think that will have? I just mentioned about like other social media, like YouTube, for example, that just cut off the accounts of people clearly for political reasons. And you had a lot of people who that was their livelihood. And in many cases, they had whole shows that were basically banned, and they didn't get paid, for the advertising money and stuff like that runs during that. And we're talking about just the advertising that was done through Google, but there was also advertising that they were doing, on their show as well. So how do you think your case is going to impact all of that? Because I think it could be pretty big.
That's about as big as it gets. So let's think about this for a moment. If we succeed, Section 230 will no longer be ambiguous. It will not be manipulatable. It will be very defined. The reality is that if they involve themselves in content provision decisions at all, if they decide what to suggest, they decide what to recommend, they decide to take money to force you out, if they decide to remove you because you're conservative, any of those decisions makes them an information content provider subject to liability, meaning Section 230 no longer applies. All of a sudden, they are now responsible for anything they do. Now, does it mean that they can't still censor? No. They have a First Amendment right? They could take down your content. And I get that argument all the time from the trolls. They're like, well, so you're saying they don't have a First Amendment right? They do. But here's the thing. Do you remember Mark Zuckerberg sitting in front of Congress and he said, Facebook is a platform for all ideas. The most important thing about your Facebook feed is who you choose to follow and who you choose, to be involved with, right? So that's a public representation in front of Congress under oath about what Facebook's about, right? Now, let me ask you something. Is being a conservative an idea? So it's not a place for all ideas. The guy lied, and he lied outright. The public representations that they have made about this company, it's all BS, nonsense.
Fraud.
So, right, it's fraud, and it's
because
purposeful.
people bought stock in that company on the basis of what was said by its CEO. So it's fraud.
It's fraud, and the reality is that people say, well, oh my God, you're going to destroy the economy. I didn't do that. In fact, actually, the court should have been on top of this a long time ago and stopped it before it happened, because the reality is big tech shouldn't be this big. They got this big because they forced everybody else out. And that's really what has them stuck now. They have to deal with that monster. It's like kind of like you made your bed and now you're going to have to deal with it. Court's going to have to deal with. They got a lot of litigation coming their way, and big tech knows it, and that's why it's an existential threat. Why do you think they're pushing so hard to put the Democrats in there? Because if they do that, you all know this. I mean, at this point, it's common knowledge. If Trump doesn't make it back in, free speech is going to die. Legitimately. Yeah. They won't care anymore. The courts won't function properly anymore, and that's because, these guys that are judges, they're human too. They're scared. We are up against a full-blown tyrannical government.
Absolutely. I'm very concerned, actually. There's a book that I'm reading right now. It's called The Psychology of Tyranny, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, and it's by Matthias Desmet. Really good book. He gets into the concept of mass formation, and essentially, which is something that has happened throughout history. It happened with the Nazis, it happened under Stalin, where people basically came under this like hypnosis. You had Jews that willingly, got on the trains to be shipped off, and willingly turned in their neighbors. That doesn't happen except by this concept, this psychological thing that happens called mass formation. And the other place where they saw it was during COVID, not just here in the US, but all over the world, where you had government saying, hey, we're going to violate your rights and you're going to help us violate your rights. And people did. And they just willingly said, okay, I'm going to allow the government to tell me that I have to go take an experimental vaccine, or I'm going to allow the government to tell me that I have to cover my face. I'm going to allow the government to tell me, and not only tell me these things, but
They're going to have you call and report your neighbor for not doing
your neighbors. Yeah, I'm going to report my neighbors.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to, chastise and humiliate anybody that challenges it, because that's what the government wants me to do. I mean, it's insane. But what he talks about in this book is that you cannot have that sort of thing happen without the help of the media. The mass media is required for that sort of thing. And so here's where I suspect that things are going to go, maybe even with your case. When you win, then immediately it's going to put a huge amount of liability on Meta and Google and or Alphabet Inc. and other companies, Twitter. It's now, I think, under new leadership, and there's changes that have been made, but it doesn't change the liability they have from the past. And we know, and what we know from the Twitter files and the Facebook files and Mark Zuckerberg's own words recently, is that the government has had their finger on the scale. They have influenced these companies. They have pushed these companies to violate Section 230. And I suspect that is going to be the defense that they're going to try to make. So how do you counter that before they try to? Clearly, he knows. I don't think he would have made the comment that he did and saying, well, yeah, the government was pressuring us to do this and censor people. He's saying that because probably of your case and maybe a few other cases that are coming, that they see the writing on the wall. They're not going to be able to wiggle out of this. And so if that is their defense, that they did it because the government told them to, what's your next step? And how does that impact things, if at all, in terms of liability for them?
So we're kind of jumping subjects here, but let me put it all in the correct framework for you. Okay. So when Mark Zuckerberg said that the United States pressured him, it didn't. I don't believe it had to do with my case against Facebook. Mine is at the core root of the law that was being used as a lever, as leverage over big tech.
Sure.
So that's really how the foundation of censorship began with the government, is because the government is also their protector. So it's not only asking them what to do, it also protects them from liability, right? Convenient, huh?
Yeah. But
when that statement came out, it has to do with something, right?
Yeah.
And I had a lot of people come to me because, I'm a subject matter expert on this thing. And, we work on other lawsuits for other people, some of which are the censorship industrial complex. We're suing the entire government right now in other cases, like Brighteon versus the United States Department of State, which is pretty much everybody: Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Facebook, Google, Twitter, NewsGuard, Institute for Strategic. It's everybody. There is a massive government censorship scheme going on now,
without a doubt.
But they said, "Well, is that important?" No, it's old news. I'll tell you why. So everybody, you've heard of Missouri versus Biden, correct?
I don't know about that one. What's
Missouri versus Biden is where the Biden administration basically overtly and publicly went after the disinformation dozen. It was 12 individuals that purportedly created 65% of the misinformation surrounding COVID-19. This happened all of 2 years ago, and Missouri and Louisiana's attorney generals came out and they sued, and they had other members that were indirectly censored as a result of this because of the COVID stuff. And that case went up to the Fifth Circuit Court, ultimately in front of a judge by the name of Doty, Doudhty. I believe that's how you pronounce it. Judge Doty nailed it. He said this is the most pervasive attack on free speech that has happened in human history. It is. That the Biden administration, they went from, this was already occurring. Everybody thinks that was a one-off. No. This started back with Obama. It actually goes back even further, but the formation of the National Defense Authorization Act, which created the Global Engagement Center, or the DEC, under the Department of State, that's where this thing has its origins. And instead of going after foreign disinformation, they went after domestic disinformation. Yep. And that's how this whole thing perpetuated. So
and then they added, the crazy thing about it is they took an organization, CISA, whose sole function was, basically protecting national critical infrastructure against cyber attacks. And they added that as part of their mission.
Yes.
Protecting against disinformation.
Yep. And there's more than that.
It has nothing to do with cyber.
There's so much more. There's so much more than that.
Oh, yeah.
They paid foreign governments to create censorship tools and to create blacklists, which are used for domestic speech. Now, think about that. U.S. taxpayer money was sent via our government to a foreign government, one that we fought a revolutionary war to get out from under, to censor Americans.
That's right.
I mean, now we're on the level of sedition and treason. Like, this is really bad. But here's the crazier part. So Doty, in that case, if you because people don't read the cases, they try to go with headlines and so forth because we don't have enough time to be subject matter experts. But in that case, Doty came to the conclusion, the government censored 100%. There is it's what's called a pervasive entwinement or joint participation. The government got big tech to act, and they acted at the behest of the government. So were they pressured? Yes. It was already a federal court decision. Didn't matter that Facebook said it. Hold on, let me finish, because this is important. So Doty says, yep, it happened. And then the Surgeon General, Murthy, he fights back, right? Basically, the United States turned around, and they took it to the Supreme Court to appeal the injunction. Now, that's not the case, because everybody said, Missouri versus Biden. That case lost. No, it didn't. It was under an injunction, meaning they had enjoined the United States to stop, and the injunction was challenged at the Supreme Court level under Murthy versus Missouri, the reversed, or the opposition. And in that circumstance, the Supreme Court looked at it and said, well, yeah, it's likely they'll prevail that these members of Louisiana, Missouri, and other members, like Jim Hoft, I believe, and Aaron Carity, and a bunch of others, they'll probably prevail. But it's not enough for an injunction. They weren't the directly harmed. They were indirectly harmed, which means that it's got to go to evidence and trial and everything else. You need a smoking gun for an injunction, especially against a government, right? And even though the federal court said, the Supreme Court said, no, they don't have the standing for an injunction. It was unfortunate.
Yeah.
Now, that sent it back. Now, what happened? Immediately thereafter, RFK Jr. files a case. Now, he was one of the disinformation dozen. And what happened then is that Doty, he consolidated the cases. He brought it in and said, and then he did a whole standing analysis, and they're going to press forward again. Now, he actually is one of the disinformation dozen. Therefore, they have the standing going back up to, and the injunction was put right back on again. There's no headlines about that.
No.
The injunction's
I haven't seen anything about it.
Right. It's back.
All I saw was and that's what I was going to bring up, is that all I had seen was that the Supreme Court basically denying it. So,
yes.
So that's good information, because I did not know that injunction was put back in place. Now,
and meanwhile, Kamala, you're saying, is violating it.
Yep.
I mean, absolutely. She's the Biden White House, and they're supposed to not be going after big tech. So this is, they don't care. And because, that's kind of what Doty said in there, is he said that this wasn't an accident. They didn't accidentally violate people's rights. This is deliberate. They are trying to take the sovereignty of we the people.
You're answering the next question that I had for you, which is that many conservatives believe that big tech censorship disproportionately affects voices on the right. And based on your experience, how much of this do you think is intentional, and how much is driven by algorithms or corporate policies? And I think you just answered that question. I think it is.
It's all intentional.
Absolutely.
Big tech is acting for its own financial benefit, and the government is acting to suppress any narratives that they don't like. The two are, when they say pervasively entwined, they may as well be the same entity. They're trying to say, we did it voluntarily. You remember how the next sentence that he said was, but we ultimately did it voluntarily. That's because he wants to tie it to 230C2, even though that's actually not what's been protecting him. It's been C1.
Right.
And at the end of the day, it's not his decision or a judge's decision as to decide what is voluntary or not voluntary. It's supposed to go to a jury.
Yeah, you're talking about
the jury's going to say,
you're talking about the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story, that saying it was Russian disinformation and all of that, right?
The anti-vaxxing, all of it, that the government is fully entwined with him. They were entwined with him in the middle of when Donald Trump was there. He was being undermined from his own, not his cabinet, but the intelligence community had formed what was called the Election Integrity Partnership, and that was designed to get him out because at the end of the day, and this is where kind of the conversation we had before this even started, this is where we learned about what is called SIGI. I didn't know exactly what it was. You might refer to it as the establishment, the deep state, the globalists, whatever you want to call it. It's actually nicknamed the Council. And SIGI is the Office of the Inspector Generals, and it is codified. They operate outside of the Constitution and outside of law. And the reason they do that is because they have been tasked with trying to keep the peace globally, meaning they don't want to get us into wars, and they wanted to keep stability because they didn't want some president coming in every 4 years and upending anything, which means that effectively democracy's gone.
Yeah. You know,
it's already gone.
It's interesting you mentioned this because the FBI had 302s that referenced, actually, they spoke about when they were interviewing people related to the Hillary Clinton email server. They had 302s that actually, you know, these are interview files, right, where they're writing down their notes, that had very high level people within the government referring to the shadow government. And,
there you go. The council.
And they even named some names. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, many of the inspector generals, they're appointed by presidents to stay in place and to act outside the Constitution. And the players that they think are the leaders aren't necessarily the leaders, but they do not want populist candidates because they can't leave the president to choice. They can't leave it. So what they normally do, and we kind of understand it now, you know, the general populace understands is all it is they just make sure that both the Democrat and Republican Party candidates are controlled by them. And all that means is that they're beholden to the establishment.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all it's happened all of this time. Everybody says it's the Democrats. It's not only the Democrats.
No.
Republicans too. And the reason they can't stand Trump is because he is not beholden to them. Yeah. And we all have, and the people that have woken up, I think that's even what you see now with the left waking up and they're realizing, yes, everybody is lying to you. Literally everybody. They own the science. Everything is like illegitimate. And that is because they can't have Trump in because Trump will actually make the change America needs and wants. That's it. Yeah. That's how this whole scheme works. And Big Tech's just one player in the whole game.
I've been saying for a long time that, many in Congress and many judges for that matter, and to your point, you brought up about the one judge that has all the tech stocks. I think that you've got a lot of people who are bought and paid for, and those that they can't buy or bribe, they blackmail. And it's not hard for them to do when you consider how much surveillance capability there is with companies like Facebook and Google. I mentioned this in another show, but I want to mention it here. I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I actually caught Facebook services listening to my conversations and then transmitting that data to Twitter. So they had some sort of back alley deal or some sort of agreement or whatever. And how it started was I was at church and we were breaking down the sound system afterwards. And two of the guys that I was, working with were talking about this band ABBA, from the 70s. Mm-hmm. And I'd never, that was before my time, not really my thing. So I never looked or done a search for that band, never looked it up. But it showed up in my Twitter my Twitter interests, which was buried real deep. And I was looking at that and monitoring it every day because somebody had leaked that was one of the ways they were shadow banning people on Twitter is they were basically putting in certain key terms in your into your interests, things like Donald Trump or whatever. And then you would get basically throttled on the basis of that information being in your Twitter interests. So I was monitoring it every day and clearing it out. And the day after that conversation happened, I see ABBA as an interest. Now, there's only one way that could possibly deduce that, and that's if it was listening to the conversation that was going on. And so I decided to go on a crusade, to try to catch them in the act of listening. And what I found is it wasn't Twitter that was doing the listening. It was Facebook. Facebook services was running like a rooted malware program. And it was actually capturing, it was turning on my microphone and turning it off. And it was every 7 seconds, it was basically pulling down, or every minute it was pulling down like maybe 7 seconds worth of conversation. And then packaging that up, sending it off to whatever they, their algorithms look at it and analyze it. And then they were selling that data to other companies like Twitter and others, for marketing data. Well, I published this whole thing. I had a packet sniffer on my phone. I had another app that it was monitoring my microphone. And I had screenshots of everything, timestamps of everything. And I did a big old long, thing on that on Twitter, and I published it. And somebody reached out to me and they said, "Oh, this is, they said they wanted to remain anonymous and they didn't want, me to know their name, but they started sharing some stuff with me." And I was kind of like suspicious at first. I'm like, I don't know if I trust this. But the guy said some things that were kind of crazy. And one of the things that he said kind of caught my attention. So he mentioned, number one, he mentioned that he works for a company in Southern California that does data mining, and that the government come in anytime they want with an NSL and just take their servers. And I was like, whoa, first off, not many people know what an NSL is. I do, because I was with the intelligence community for a while, and it's a national security letter. So, basically it's not a warrant, but these guys were coming in. And at first he didn't resist, but these servers are expensive. So he started telling them no. And then they came in and they dropped, I guess, some pictures, of him with his, mistress, and said, "You want these ending up in the inbox of your wife?" And so, they basically blackmailed them to get what they wanted. Now, when he started talking about this, he said something else. And I was just like, I don't know if I believe it. He said, "Look, the AI is so good. And in fact, the voice recognition is so good that you don't even need to have your phone with you. They already know where your phone is. And if you leave your phone in the car and you go into a bar, they'll know from other people's phones. They can pick up on your voice recognition and do the same thing, basically listen to you through somebody else's phone." Mm-hmm. And so when he said that, I was like, I don't know, man, that seems a little bit, sci-fi-ish and too out there. But I decided to test it. So I had a job fair that I was interviewing people all day at. I was going to be in the same place, same location. I walked in with my phone. I powered off my phone. I shoved it in the bottom of a bag. And then I started having conversations with people about, job interviews all day long. And one of the people was asking me about what I did for NSA and for Marine Forces Cyber Command. And I was trying to explain to him what a cyber protection team is. And so I used the term, it's a tiger team, which is a slang term, basically a rapid deployment team that will deploy all over the world to deal with, these, cyber attacks, cyber warfare attacks against our national critical infrastructure. The next day, I go into my Twitter interests, because that's the main place where I was able to see what it was actually listening to. And guess what shows up in there? The Clemson Tigers. Now, the algorithm wasn't smart enough to figure out that Tiger Team was a slang term. And so it associated it with a team that had to do with Tigers, right? The Clemson Tigers. I didn't even know there was a team called the Clemson Tigers, because I'm not a sports guy. And I just don't, I'm more of a nerd. So I was kind of like, that blew my mind, because it proved that. Now, I'm going to tell you something that happened. And this just happened literally. I was doing a pre-record before coming on here with you with Dr. Robert Epstein. Okay. This is the guy who's, done a lot of research into, the manipulation by Google and all of that. And I have a Android phone right here. It was on, but I had it on silent mode, and and I had I even turned down the volume. Okay, and as he's talking and he's explaining the manipulation that Google is doing, my phone speaks up and it says, there's greater context to this discussion. And it starts to try to tell me and try to interrupt the show to say that basically that what he's saying, is being said without context. I was blown away. That means that it figured out that who he was and who he was talking, it knew his voice. It recognized his voice. It saw it as a threat. And so it tried to interrupt the show, and I had to power off my phone because of the fact that it wouldn't shut up, even when I put all the volume all the way down and I put it on silent mode. Scared that.
I would have recorded all of that. I would have just the interview, and I would have turned the whole thing on and recorded all of that, because that would have blown everything up all over.
Insane. Well, I guess it did get recorded because you might be able to pick it up on the show because it was.
I would be looking into that, because if that's the case, and you have evidence of it.
That's right.
And it's tough to get evidence because weird things happen all over the place.
Yes.
And they say, oh, it's glitches and whatever. No.
So
there's all sorts of things going on.
There's another thing that I want to mention to you, and I think this is important. I think it's important to your case even. When I was working for Marine Forces Cyber Command or Cyberspace Command, I had we were detached essentially to NSA, and we were part of what they called National Mission. So they sent us over to NSA. We got read on to things like FISA and intelligence authorities and all this other tools that are used for spying on our foreign enemies, right? We were told you can never use this stuff against the American people. If you do, you're going to jail.
Yeah.
Of course, it's turned out that it's been used against American citizens nonstop by the FBI for the last, 10 years. And to know, and even though the courts have shown that they've utilized, tools to spy on people, it doesn't matter. Nobody's gone to jail for it. And that is deprivation of rights under color of law when the FBI is actually using tools intended for and only authorized for foreigners on American soil, on U.S. citizens. The courts have actually proven this.
It should punch through qualified immunity. The reality is that they should be criminally charged individually as government agents that operated against the sovereignty of the nation. And if they're doing it on behalf of another country.
Well, I'm going to tell you what, there were non-disclosure agreements, that I had to sign that went into, let's just put it this way, there were immunity agreements with some of the very companies that we're talking about. Immunity agreements between our government and these corporations to allow them to essentially break the law. So that is illegal and it is unconstitutional. And it's the only reason I've even ever spoken about it. And I have spoken about it publicly before. But I think this is something that, it's a concern. And I think that, I don't know all of the immunity agreements. I only know the ones that have to do with surveillance, but I imagine there are immunity agreements as well that allow them to do things like violate terms of agreement, violate, the freedom of speech of individuals, violate maybe even Section 230. So don't be surprised if something like that comes out, through this whole thing. And
we're prepared for that. And in reality, we have to be careful because they will classify things on us and then we'll get locked out. So we have to be very careful about how deep we go. But yes, we are aware that, and if you just think about the overall concept of that, if there is an immunity agreement between the United States of America and big tech, our entire allegation is credible right there. Done. The fact is that surveillance is happening. So there's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Now the thing is that there's a law, and I forget what the third party doctrine or something to that extent, because it's not my expertise at the moment. It's actually Amy Peikoff. She has a really good theory on that.
It's not a matter of if. All right. It's not a matter of if. It is happening.
It is 100%.
And I'm saying it right now. If they come arrest me, they're only going to be proving that they were violating the Constitution illegally. So,
Right.
they're going to keep silent about it. But you're right. They will overclassify.
It's already happening. Yes.
Yeah.
And that was the whole point of when Zuckerberg came out and said that they're pressuring. That's old news. We already knew that.
Yeah.
The reality is we know it is already happening. We have federal court judges that have agreed it's happening. It is happening. It is a matter of whether or not we can stop it.
Well, we need judges that are going to have the cojones to stand up against it and do the right thing.
Tough. It is very tough.
Yeah. Beyond legal battles, what changes would you like to see in the law or regulation to ensure platforms like Facebook and Twitter are held accountable for censorship and anti-competitive practices?
Whew. The hard part with that is that it's so pervasive, the censorship, the embedded, the entwinement with the government. How do you fix that? There's obviously Section 230's change, which would make a dramatic difference in terms of antitrust and unfair competition in tort cases, which should gut them financially. But at the same token, I think that the reason that the government is going to let this thing go through finally, because everybody says, isn't that great? I don't think that it's anything more than the government doesn't need it anymore, doesn't need the ambiguity of Section 230, because AI is going to be able to do all of this at scale. And the reality is that if we don't see massive change, because you're saying, how do you fix it? Who knows? I mean, the reality is like we're already, it's the frog. We're in the pot. It's already 200 degrees. I don't know what we can do at this point, but the only thing you can do is keep fighting from every angle. It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. If people have woken up, and you said this earlier, and it was interesting because I want you to realize the power of social media also did something that they weren't even prepared for this. 2016 election, right? Go back. 2016 election. The media was the filter for every single populist candidate. So they could control elections, like we're talking about the establishment or the council. They could always control the elections. Big tech did something that they were not prepared for. It allowed a candidate to talk directly to the electorate without the filter.
Yeah.
They were not prepared for Trump coming in and just wiping the floor with them. So they had to capitulate, which is why he was undermined by so many people to get him out for the 2020 election, to lock this thing down for the 2024 election. And I mean, his support far outweighs Kamala. Yeah. But they're trying to make us think that Kamala's got all this support and so forth. And I mean, granted, she's got a lot of the women. Yeah. They've got them convinced emotionally, when the reality is they're walking us into the trap. Yeah, this is common, and they don't understand that that's how they do it, with bait, and the bait is the emotion.
Yeah, there's a comment in the comment section from a friend of mine, actually, Scott Crouch. He was with the West Virginia State Police for a very long time, and he brings up a point. He says, they charge police officers with civil rights violations all the time. And him and I have talked about this. And that's the problem, is that while that's great, actually, that's the way it should be.
Yeah, it should.
The problem is the people who bring the charges usually are the FBI. It's the feds. But who's watching the feds? No one.
Right. Who's watching the watchers?
That's right. They get away with it. And so one of the things that I think needs to happen within law is, I think, first of all, I think the justice system at the federal level is completely broken, because it's in the self-interest of the FBI or in the self-interest of the DOJ to not prosecute these companies that are giving them such powerful tools to spy on us.
Correct.
So why would they do that? And if they allow that, discovery would show they're violating the Constitution and the law.
Right.
So
and then there's no accountability.
There's zero accountability. So one of the things that I have called for when I was running for office, and I'm going to continue to be sounding, this to our Congress members, is there's something called an Article 1 tribunal. And we have them. They exist already. The U.S. Tax Court is a perfect example of Article 1. However, I would argue that it's not being used in the way that the founders believed it was supposed to be used. It was specifically designed in order to adjudicate agency issues. And this is exactly the kind of thing that needs to be adjudicated by and I think it should be a public tribunal. And I think they need to go after all of these people violating the Constitution.
Willfully violating. It's not just it's not accidental. No. It's willfully violating their constitutional rights. And that should pierce their veil of sovereignty. And the reality there is that, in some cases, this is capital punishment. I mean, what they're doing is destroying, our rights. And I agree with you 100%. I mean, I've been facing it in court.
Without a doubt, they will need a special prosecutor outside of the Department of Justice in order to prosecute these cases. And that it's the only way this gets resolved. Because to be honest with you, I feel like we've already lost our country. We have a facade, right? We have the appearance of freedom. We have the appearance of constitutional governance, but the reality, it's like the Emerald Castle, right? In what's it called? The movie
Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz. Thank you. It's like the Emerald Castle and the Wizard of Oz. It's just a facade, and there's really, behind the scenes, you've got the intelligence communities and the Department of Justice basically manipulating things and it's really it's not even all the people that are working there that have good intentions. No, it is the establishment. It is the shadow government. It is the bureaucrats that want to remain in power. It is the SIGI, as you mentioned it, right?
And realize the only ones that can take down SIGI is the president, the Supreme Court. They're the only ones with the power to undo them. And that's why they're terrified of Trump getting in there, because he could actually stop this. And it's funny, to your point, I call it the illusion of democracy, the magician's choice.
Yeah.
Hey, pick a card, any card you want to pick, but you're going to pick the card I want you to pick. That's right. How they run democracy.
Exactly.
Yep.
That's a very good description of it. Your fight against censorship is part of a broader cultural and political battle that's happening in America. How do you see the struggle playing out over the next few years? And do you think Americans are waking up to the degree that they need to, and to these dangers of censorship? I mean, it seems to me like there are a handful of us in the greater scheme of the total population that see this for what it is and see the danger of it. But it seems like there's an awful lot of people that are just completely asleep to this, and that they don't care, or they're ignorant and they don't know about it. What say you? What do you think?
So there's an inherent problem. I think it's interesting because I always see these polls, and what's the biggest problem in America? And they're talking about, immigration and elections and so forth. And it's never really on that list: free speech. And it's sad because it's bigger than all of them. If we lose free speech, we lose everything.
That's right.
Everything, because we will not be able to publicly challenge it. It'll be misinformation. And you've got Kamala out there saying, maybe we should have criminal charges for misinformation. That is your government telling you that if you say the wrong thing, you will go to jail. That is the epitome of a tyrannical government. And see, here's the problem.
And they'll make up some bogus thing saying that if you speak out against the Democrats, you're in league with Russian intelligence.
That's what I'm saying.
So we're going to overcharge you with treason or something. Yeah.
But see, here's the other problem: is hate speech. Inherently, if you say hate speech, you go, "Well, that's terrible. We should stop that." Right? Yeah. That's terrible. Except for the fact that that's the point of the First Amendment. Yep. They're playing on people's emotions to go, "Oh, we should stop terrible things." The point of the First Amendment, and you can't get this across to people that are emotional.
Yeah, you're right.
It protects the terrible things. Like, the fact is that they say, "Well, yeah, but you're inciting violence." What else would you do against a tyrannical government?
Yeah,
like, that's what we fought a war for. Now, do I condone violence? No, not at all, and I'm not suggesting anybody does. So be clear about my words. I am not saying I condone inciting violence, but the reality is that the Constitution calls for that.
Yeah.
If we lose it to a tyrannical government, I mean,
we have that.
How do we do that?
That's why we have the Second Amendment. It actually specifically says that is the point and purpose of the Second Amendment. It's not so we can go hunting, even to a certain degree. It's not about even personal protection. It's about taking our country back if we had to.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's why they're going after assault weapons,
right,
is what they call assault weapons. But they're going after long rifles, and that's real simple. That defeats body armor.
Yeah,
that's the difference. If we all have handguns or shotguns, when SWAT comes through the door, or military comes through the door, or the UN comes through the door, they can stop that. If we have long rifles, they can't.
I want to make a comment about this issue of how do we deal with this. So I think partly what we're dealing with, again, I go back to this book that I'm reading right now. It's the Psychology of Totalitarianism. In it, the author of it has done a lot of research on how this is played out in other countries and other wars, and like I said, the Nazis, the communists of Russia under Stalin, and he brings up an interesting idea. And it speaks directly to what you just mentioned about First Amendment and why it's so important. He says that in his research, the only places where, like the Nazis, for example, were ineffective in getting mass formation underway. Like they would march into other countries and just take them over, and before you knew it, people were turning themselves in. But they were unable to do it in one. I can't remember which country it was. I think it was Norway. I might be incorrect on that, but it doesn't matter. But this one country they went into, they were unable to convince the people for whatever reason, culturally or whatever their purpose was. Maybe the fact that they didn't have a mass media, who knows? They were unable or they were not susceptible to mass formation. And because of it, they would speak out. They kept speaking out. The Nazi soldiers were already under mass formation. They were doing things that they knew deep down inside were wrong, but they were doing it because they were part of this, almost like this hypnotic thing going on.
They were part of the pack.
Follow the orders of their Führer. This group of people, though, resisted them, and they resisted them by debating with them, by pointing out and calling them out for their immoral and illegal and their violations of human rights. And what ended up happening was this particular unit of the Nazi Party, Hitler was pissed off because they were ineffective, and they started doubting and they started questioning their Führer. And they actually, because of it, there wasn't a whole lot of stuff that was done in this country. So it is important for us to speak up. When we see people that are just buying into stuff and they're just going along, we have to speak up. We have to call people to critical thinking. We have to basically call out their bullshit and call it for what it is. If we don't, we lose. That's the bottom line. And if we lose, then it's anybody's guess as to whether it will devolve down into violence or not. If it doesn't devolve down into violence to fight back, it will devolve down into totalitarian violence against us and those who did speak out. So it behooves us all to speak out and to absolutely do everything we can to protect free speech. So I applaud you for what you're doing and the fight that you're in. I need to wrap this up, but I want to ask, how can people, what advice do you have for everyday Americans who feel like their voices are being silenced online? And how can they get involved in this fight to protect free speech?
Well, a lot of it is litigation. Obviously, I have the case against Facebook. A lot of that Section 230. I became a subject matter expert. I started working with my attorney in other cases. We have a team of people. There's a case, Brighteon versus the Department of State et al., which is essentially the censorship industrial complex. We're working on a very big case right now. 2 more just came in the door. We have several that unfortunately, a lot of these people that come to us for help, they have good cases. And pardon me. Unfortunately, they can't afford it because we can't work for free. We can't take on more than what we can handle. And, we all have to pay our bills. So in that, I formed the Social Media Freedom Foundation, which is a 501c3. Its charter and goal is to protect our constitutional freedoms on the internet, on social media. Our rights don't end when the internet begins. That's just not how it works, at least in the United States. And we're seeing that all around the world. They have, in the UK, they're showing up people's doors for Facebook posts, Twitter posts and stuff. It's insane, but that's coming here if we don't stop this. I mean, this is the biggest problem in the world. So how they can help? We need funding to help these other people, which in turn help you. Whoever is out there, we're fighting for your rights. I mean, this is one of the biggest fights in the world. It is one of the most important fights in the world. Our site is socialmediafreedom.org. A lot of the litigation that we've done so far is listed on there. There's materials on there. There's a couple articles that we've written that explain some of the things that we talked about tonight. If you can, donate. If you can't, it's very easy to just take this information, share Nate's show, share this show. That it's very easy, but see, the thing is you start to educate other people, and the more people that start to understand this, and remember, our argument currently isn't actually political. It's free speech. Everybody should be for free speech.
That's right.
And you can see, actually, if you scroll back down again to the right there, that is my attorney, myself, and Mike Adams with the Brighteon versus the Department of State. That is a huge case because it goes back into the censorship industrial complex. They went after Brighteon. And that has, of course, transformed over time from election integrity to COVID and the Virality Project and so forth. But I've done many, many, many interviews. There I was Capitol. That the entire mainstream media ignored this. We were filing a constitutional challenge against Section 230, announced it with Congressman Louis Gohmert in front of all the media, and the media just buried it.
Yeah.
Does that tell you what we're dealing with in the media?
Yep.
It's been kind of crazy. So there's a lot of materials on there. There's documents of all the different cases. Right. You can see we filed a lot of stuff. We've been fighting this, but top right there, it says donate. If you can donate, that money will be used to fight for freedom. That's all it uses. I have literally never taken a single paycheck from our 501c3. I have used it purely to pay for other people's cases and to get, the legal actions done against, like, for example, the Supreme Court. Do you know how expensive it is to file in the Supreme Court? Because they require that you put together a bound book. And if you have a long case, do you know how much those books cost me this last time around? $27,000.
Wow.
Just to produce the books. And that's to continue to fight for everybody's constitutional rights. This is not a cheap endeavor, and I have generally not asked for help. I've just gone ahead and done the work myself, but you know how it is. It's just you sit there and it aggravates you that this is the way it is. So you just take a stand and do something about it, And I mean, obviously you did the same. In hindsight, what you did, you question, you go, whoa. I didn't realize this was going to be this bad, but it is. Yep. You have to fight for it. It's a different type of fight. It's an irregular warfare, but it is very much war. We are at war with our own government, trying to preserve our own rights.
Oh, I gotta tell you something. All right. Oh my gosh, this is just a perfect example. Okay, I just posted in the chat socialmediafreedom.org.
Freedom.org.
And Facebook kicked it back and said an error occurred. Wait a moment, then try again. So why does that not surprise me?
So think about that. Because they don't want this fixed.
So Facebook comment sections will not allow socialmediafreedom.org to be posted in there. That should tell you everything.
People donate to us because now it looks like the 501c3 has a cause of action. I don't know if you can it preserves it right in this case, but that's going to be an interesting one. They may have just messed that up pretty bad.
So listen, folks, again, I'm going to repeat it, socialmediafreedom.org. Please go there, check it out. The amount of case files that they have documented on here are just amazing. And what's this here? Submit your story, members. Tell me about that.
So we originally had it set up so that people that were harmed. But the reality right at the moment is that we're so inundated and underfunded that we have to go with the cases that we can work on at the moment. As we expand, we'll try and help more and more people as this goes. But I'm hoping if I can win my case, I can then fund it, myself and go after these companies one by one.
Amen to that. We have almost 1,200 live viewers right now on the show. I'm sure there's got to be somebody out there who's moved by this story, who's moved by what we've been talking about, and who has the funds to be able to help support this cause. This is extremely important. This is the kind of stuff, folks. I want to just share something on a little personal note here. The 2020 election, I worked down in DC and worked on election integrity work. The White House contacted me and asked me to come down because of my background in cybersecurity. And I went for 3 months on my own dime and living out of a hotel. I was an expert witness in multiple cases. In fact, 7 different cases, including the one that went to the Supreme Court. All the cases were basically turned down on the basis of standing, which I thought was weak. But at the end of the day, I came home and I was depressed. I mean, because, all of that work for nothing. I was completely depressed, and I spent, a couple of days just praying and asking God, what the heck is going on in our country? And I was led to a scripture in Amos chapter 5. And the whole thing is about, God's judgment on the nation of Israel at the time because of all these things that they were doing. And everything that they were doing that God was upset about were injustices. It was talking about people who, because they were rich, they were able to, basically take advantage of people in the courts. It talked about people who were poor that couldn't get a decent defense. Talked about, all of this stuff having to do with justice, about how they hated those who told the truth, they despised them, and those who lied, they would, basically support them. And then it talks about God's judgment coming on that nation because of that. What's interesting is there's only one thing in that entire passage that says you have a chance to turn this around. And it says, hate what is evil, love what is good. And it says, and maintain justice in the courts. That is the only way. And it says, and then maybe, it's not even a promise. It says, and then perhaps the Lord will relent from his judgment and basically return peace to the land. So if we want to see, I think, our country saved, it's going to have to happen through the courts, folks. And court cases are expensive. And so I'm a firm believer that you are on the right path and you are doing exactly what needs to happen. We need more of these kinds of court cases coming. And that's how things have to be won. Because if we can't win it in the courts, that's our last stand. At that point, if we can't win it in the courts, then there is only one other alternative, and I don't, and it's not good for anyone, by the way. It's not a good alternative. It's one that, remember, people like to quote Thomas Jefferson's Tree of Liberty statement, but what they oftentimes forget is that when he says the Tree of Liberty must from time to time be refreshed with the blood of not just tyrants, but the blood of patriots too. And I don't want to see that day come. We already had a civil war in this country. I certainly hope we never have another one again. And we need to fight like hell to prevent that day from ever occurring. And the only way that we can fight that is through our courts. So folks, please, if you are somebody who is a spiritually led person, please pray about donating money to this cause. And if you are somebody who is not, but you have means, please consider what the alternative is. We have to fight this fight the right way. And that only way that's going to be done is through the courts. And you guys are clearly, you're doing things the right way, and you are making a difference. Let's hope that that we find a judge or two that have the courage to do the right thing.
Yep.
Jason, I always like to give the last word to my guest. And if there's one thing that people are going to take away from the conversation that we had tonight, because people have short attention spans, what is the one thing, the most important thing that you think that people need to remember and take away from our conversation?
Well, the most important thing that I don't think you see on any other shows is I'm not coming to you complaining about the problem. We have the solution. We already know how to beat this. We know what's wrong with it. We know how to stop it. What we don't have is a court system that's helping us. If we can get a court system, like you said, with the fortitude to stop this. I mean, if we have to come back to the Supreme Court a third time, if they had answered our question back in 2012 or 2020 was the first Supreme Court run, we would have already stopped the censorship industrial complex. So that is really the takeaway here is that we know how to fix this. Get the message out that, I just showed it to you in the law itself, what is wrong with the law, and we know how to fix it. We just need a court to do it. And like you said, if you pray, because November 20th, we are set 9:30 in the morning, courtroom 1. Pray that the Ninth Circuit in Pasadena does the right thing here. That's all we're asking them to do. Apply the law the way it's written. Apply it constitutionally. Do the right thing. That's it.
Yes.
So that's the takeaway.
Definitely. Folks, remember, you can follow them. You can get more information on this at socialmediafreedom.org.
You can also reach out via Twitter.
Yeah, I was
Twitter. I'm still alive on Twitter. Yes, it's just my name. It's Twitter at Jason / Jason FYK, JASONFYK.com, or you know how it goes. But that's my Twitter handle. You can find me. I leave my messages on in case you have a legal issue with regards to social media. You want to pursue it. But realize these are expensive fights. This is a lot of people come to us and say, hey, can you do it? You can't. These are huge companies, big firepower. Yeah. But if you need me, you can reach me generally.
Awesome. Well, I always close in prayer with my show, and I'm going to do that tonight. I just want to, start by praying right now and praying that things will go well. Heavenly Father, I just thank you for Jason and what he's doing and his organization. Lord, I pray your blessing on them. I pray that you would help them to be successful. Lord, we know that the last stand is in our courts, and we need your help, Lord. We need the hearts and the minds of the judges, of the people who are involved in these cases, Lord, that have the power to make a determination. I pray, God, that you would give them the courage to do the right thing, no matter what the cost is to them personally or professionally, that they would do the right thing. And I pray, Lord, that you would bring more whistleblowers out of companies like Meta and out of companies like Google or Alphabet Inc. and others that are abusing, the Section 230 and are doing things that are unconstitutional and illegal. And I pray that you would also bring whistleblowers out of the FBI or out of the government, the FBI, and whoever else, Lord, is involved in this Department of Homeland Security, that you would give people the courage to stand up and fight, because this is our last stand for free speech. Lord, I pray that you would help Jason's oral arguments in November to go well, that they would be received positively by the courts, and we pray for justice. And we ask, Lord, that you would save this nation. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Folks, remember to follow and subscribe. You can also catch my show. I do a lot of other shows, not just this one here, but I have some talk radio and some other things. You can find all of that on theraisingcainshow.com. And you can also find me on Twitter at Nate Cain for WV. And please also remember smokingguncoffee.com is a way that you can support this show. And just make sure and use the code Cain when you order it. God bless you guys. Stay vigilant, stay strong, and stay free.
Raise some Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, we'll watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.